Okay, we are recording. So problem one, in the US, textiles are sold in two separate and perfectly competitive markets. Now you're going to learn a lot more as the year goes on about what that actually means. Perfectly competitive market. That's just something, that's just a term you're going to become very familiar with. The textiles produced in the US are sold in market A, and imported textiles are sold in market B. Explain how the supply curve for textiles produced in the U.S. will be affected by a decrease in the number of firms in the U.S. that are actually producing textiles. So that's in the U.S. and an increase in the price of textiles. So the easiest way to answer this is it's not requiring it, but I would still say if you were doing this on an exam, the easiest thing to do would be to draw a graph that looks something like this, okay? And so I've drawn market A and market B. Domestic are textiles that are produced in the US, because that's a domestic in country. And then market B is for textiles that the US imports from the world, China, India, or anywhere outside the US. So the question is, and I need to move this back. Let me just put this. The question is, what would happen? How will the market for market A, the domestic market in the US, be affected if there are fewer firms producing textiles? Okay, so if we look at this just basic graph, we have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So this is what we call market equilibrium, because the quantity supplied represented by the blue curve and the quantity demanded represented by the green downward sloping curve, where they intersect, where quantity demanded equals quantity supply, is where the market is in equilibrium. So that's where we start. That's where we're assuming we are. Now the supply curve typically slopes up, because as price goes up, firms are willing to supply more of the good. If they're able to get more for it, they're able to supply more. Because the assumption is that as a firm supplies more, their cost goes up. And we'll talk a lot more about that. Their cost per unit goes up as they supply more. That's just a theoretical truism in a market. So that's why that the relationship in supply between price and quantity is positive. Now, common sense tells us that if as price goes up, demand goes down. Quantity demanded goes down when price goes up. Fewer people are going to want to buy it, or people will buy less of it. You know, if the price of milk doubles tomorrow, less milk will be sold, right? So that's why there's an inverse or a negative relationship between price and quantity for demand, for what we call the demand function. Okay, so that's just basic supply and demand. The very, we've got two variables, price and quantity. So the easy answer here, let me scoot you guys back over, is that the supply curve is going to shift to the left, because there's fewer firms supplying textiles. So that means that quantity is going to, that means that at this quantity, or at the original, okay, at this price, there was this quantity, right? Now, because there's fewer firms at the same price, the quantity drops back to here, okay, to here at the same price, okay? But that's not where we're going to end up because the demand hasn't changed at all. So what actually happens is you've got a shift in supply because there's fewer firms supplying. It's just common sense. If there's fewer firms, there's going to be less supply, which means the supply shrinks. So at the same price, you're going to have less. So that's why we know it shifts to the left. But since demand does not change, and price is going to go up. So we're going to get a new price up here because our new equilibrium is going to be here. So our actual quantity is going to be there, okay? So when the supply decreases, we're going to have less quantity produced at a higher price. We're going to end up right here, okay? So two things happened. You had a shift in the supply because, now this is important, a variable outside the model. The only two variables in this model is price and quantity. The variable outside the model was just, for whatever reason, firms shut down. Firms in America producing textiles shut down. That's the assumption that we're given right here, okay? A decrease in the number of firms. That is a variable outside the model, which means the curve has to shift. The curve has to shift. If anything changes outside the model, the curve shifts. So if something changes supply other than price and quantity, the supply curve has to shift. Now, which meant that the price went up. So that's the second thing that happened, okay? Price went up. Shift right here, right? Now, when the price goes up, that is a variable in the model. So when we think about demand hasn't changed, but price has changed, which means a variable inside, sorry about that, I'm trying to get this guy to get okay, which means a variable inside the model changed for demand, so there's a movement along the line. So the equilibrium actually goes from here to here. So a shift in the supply curve and a movement along the, I can't get that guy. Here we go, let me just do something here real quick. Okay, that makes it easier. The movement along the line. So whenever a variable inside the model, in this case price or quantity changes, there's going to be a movement along the line. And that's why we move up the demand curve to a new equilibrium. So we've got less overall supply, a higher price, and lower quantity, okay? Does anybody have any questions so far? Where'd you guys go, by the way? I don't see you. You guys here?
Yeah.
Okay, because I lost the view for whatever reason. Only see one. That's weird. Oh. There you are. Okay. I'm still learning how to use this thing.
Does the demand, the quantity demanded decrease because the price increased?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. Quantity to demand decreases because the price went up, right? Remember, there's an inverse relationship. So the tricky part here is understanding what happens when a variable outside the model changes which in turn affects a variable inside the model, which is price, which in turn causes a movement along the line for demand, right? I know this is all brand new, and don't get frustrated if you don't completely understand, but I hope most of you have had enough math to understand basically, how this works, right? Okay. This is actually a function. We could actually write an equation. If we had numbers for prices and quantity, we could write a function. Y equals mx plus b. We could do a function for these curves, but we don't need to worry about that. I just want you guys to get the basic concepts of what affects what, okay? So now, it's asking you, now this is tricky. By the way, just so you know, this is a very old AP exam. I think this is from an exam back in 2003 or something, because what you have to think about this is these are two separate assumptions, okay? So it's not number one happens and then number two happens. It's number one happens and then we go back to the original and then number two happens. Does that make sense? It's not like they follow each other. And I know it's confusing, but that's how this is. But unless they say explicitly that, this happens and then this happens, take these as two separate assumptions. So an increase in price, okay, and we're talking about the supply. Now, if we go back to our original equilibrium, right, and just think about the only thing that happened now is for whatever reason, they're not telling us why, and let's not worry too much about why, price for textiles went up. Now, and the question is, remember, explain how the supply curve for textiles will be affected. Well, the only thing that happens is the price went up, you automatically know that's just going to be a movement along the line. Because remember, price is a variable inside the model. So if only price is going up and there's nothing else going on in the world except the price just went up, then you're just going to have less quantity at a higher price, and you're just simply going to get a movement. Actually, no, sorry, I just said that wrong. Sorry, I just said that wrong. So let me just correct myself. Excuse me. Come on, it's going to be this, right? This is what happens. Okay. Price went up, right? So the only thing that happens, if there's nothing else going on except price goes up, what happens to the supply curve? You're going to get a movement along the line, okay? Now, who can tell me what's going to happen now if price goes up?
Surplus. It's just going to be a surplus in here, the supply and demand curve.
Right. So price is going to go up, and you got demand here, and you got demand here. So something's going to have to give here, right? So So what we need to think about, and now this is beyond the question, but still it's something that since we're here, how are we going to get back to equilibrium, right? What happens? What do we do to get back to equilibrium with a higher price. Because with a higher price, there's going to be more of a supply, but at that quantity, demand is right here, isn't it? Right. So just thinking about this, what would probably happen in the market is the overall supply would start to increase. In other words, and this is beyond the question, but I can't help it. I can't help it just because it wouldn't stay like that. They're not in equilibrium. So this is the market, right? Can you guys see? I'm curious. Can you guys see up here, or am I blocking it with your faces? Because what do you guys see on your screen? Do you see everybody at the top right here?
It's
No?
blank.
No.
You don't?
It's black. Yes, it's black.
See, because I see you guys in the way. It's weird. I'm not sure. Okay. This is a market. So if the price goes up, what happens is other firms say, wow, the price went up. We can make money in this textile market. We're going to come into the firm. Well, I mean, we're going to come into the market. So theoretically, more firms open up to produce textiles, which increases supply because of the price. Supply is going to shift right down to here, and then we have a new equilibrium right there. That's what would happen. But it doesn't ask you that, but I just wanted you to know, because you've got to eventually end up somewhere at equilibrium where supply equals the demand. And so this is the way I want you to start thinking. How do we get back to equilibrium, okay? But just to answer the question, you just simply need to say an increase in the price of textiles. If that's all that happens, it's just that it's going to increase quantity supplied along an unchanged supply curve, just a movement along the line from here to here, okay? And that's all they're asking. But just so you know, it wouldn't stop there. Something else would have to happen in order to get back to equilibrium. Because you're right, Eric. There would be, at this point right here, there would be an oversupply, because demand is back here and supply is up here, right? So there'd be a surplus. Okay. So now we're going to talk about both markets, and we're going to assume that textiles from either domestically produced or imports are substitutes, which means, you know, if you're looking for a coat, you would just as soon buy a coat made in China as you would made in America. You're just looking for the best price, right? You don't care whether it's imported. Consumers will substitute either way, right? In terms of what consumers think, they're fine with either domestically produced textiles or imports. They're just going to decide based on price, okay? So it's saying using a graph for market A and another for market B, show and explain how a substantial increase in the tariff on textiles imported in the U.S. will affect the following. Okay, so let's just take this one at a time. So what we're saying is the U.S. government is putting a tax on imported textiles. And how is that going to affect the equilibrium price and quantity? Okay. Well, what happens is that we're going to assume, and it doesn't say this, but you assume it, and I'm not sure why. It's probably a typo, but in the more up to date AP exams, they explicitly say per unit. Where is it? Per unit tariff, which means a tariff per piece of clothing, right? Not just one flat tax, but per unit, which means, now this is going to be a little bit tricky, but bear with me. if we're looking at our market for imports over here, right? Because it's asking us market B. How would it affect market B if we had a tax or a tariff on imports per unit? Well, the supply curve right here is also the marginal cost curve, MC for marginal cost. In other words, this curve represents the marginal cost of production. Now, what do I mean by marginal? Change in cost. So say Q1 is 100 shirts or whatever, just say shirts. And right here is 101 shirts. Well, this represents the cost of that 101st shirt. So theoretically, every shirt they import or produce actually to be imported, each one is a little more expensive to produce than the last one, theoretically. The real curve is shaped more like, more like this. It's not just a straight curve, but this is just simplifying it, okay? Now, think about that. If you're a factory producing cars, at some point, producing the next car is going to be more expensive because you have to hire more labor. You have to, expand your factory. So we're just assuming, to make this very, very simple, that as we produce more, the cost of each additional unit goes up. That's the marginal cost. So when there's a tax per unit, that means every single unit is a little bit more expensive by the same amount. So we have a higher cost equal to the tax, okay? So say the tax, whatever, and I'm using the word tax and tariff interchangeably, okay? Tariff is a tax, all right? So say we have a new, say the tariff is this much, going from P1 to P2, right? So that means that we're going to have a shift to about right here, right? That's what's going to happen, okay? So a per unit tariff or tax on imported goods is going to cause the supply curve to shift to the left. Reduce supply, okay? And that's the answer. So what does that mean? It means you're going to have a higher price and less quantity imported, okay? Now, that makes perfect sense, right? And I don't know how much you guys follow the news, follow politics, but the debate about whether we should put tariffs on imports from China, the argument against that is it's going to make goods cost more and we're going to get less of them. There'll be less, inexpensive goods coming into to Walmart that are really affordable. And the goods that do come in are going to cost more. And that's what happens when we put a tariff on imported goods. Does anybody have any questions on that part of it? As you can see, if you think about it, at every quantity produced, the cost is equal, the cost is increased by the amount, of the tax, right? So the tax amount is from here to here, okay? Now, this part right here is paid by the consumer, right? Because price went up from P1 to P2, two. This isn't in the question, but I just wanted to just show you because you'll have to know this. Whatever the increase in the price is, that part of the tax is paid by the consumer, and whatever the difference is right here is that part of the tax, the total tax, is paid for by the producer. Just so you know, that's how that works. But you just need to know that when there's a per unit tariff, supply shifts to the left, which means there's less supply. Price goes up, quantity goes down. Okay.
I have one question.
Sure.
So basically, on this question, is the demand curve gonna change, or it just the supply curve change because it's import?
No, the demand will not change. A tariff doesn't change how bad people want shirts. It just changes how many shirts are going to actually be supplied into the market, right? A lot of this is just common sense when you think through, right? It doesn't mean demand, just means what people demand. Like, do they, for whatever reason, right? And people, there's no reason why just the arbitrary tariff is going to make somebody want clothes less. But there's certainly, okay, so number two, how will this tariff affect? Now, this does affect demand. Now here's where, Eric, you need to think about this. If the price of imported tariffs goes up, right, and people cannot afford any longer to buy imported tariffs, what that's going to do is make the demand for domestic goods go up, right? Right, guys? Say I'm going to Walmart to buy my favorite pair of jeans because I know I can get them for $15, and because of this tariff, or foreign-made jeans, or whatever, because of this tariff, now they're $20. Well, I'm going to go to the American-made brand and buy it for $19, right? I'm going to switch. So what this does is, what this price increase in imported textiles does is cause a shift in demand for domestic, which means that price goes up and quantity produced goes up, both, when you shift the demand curve to the right. Okay? Do you guys see how that works? Everyone? You see that a price remember, these are substitutes, okay? So consumers are just as happy with imported jeans as they are American-made jeans, but when the price of imported jeans goes up, the demand for American-made jeans goes up overall, which pushes the price of them up as well, and the quantity. Okay? Are we good so far? So that gets us through part B. Okay? Now, the last two parts of this are the labor market, which is a whole nother thing. The labor market, we're also saying, is perfectly competitive. And you'll read a lot and you'll see a lot of videos explaining what that means. But just right now, we're just going to just think of it as well, let's just not worry about that right now. It's just a market, okay? A perfectly competitive market. And there's going to be a decrease in the supply of textile workers, so the wage of textile workers goes up, okay? So using a new graph for market A, show and explain how a substantial increase in the wage rate of textile workers will affect the equilibrium price and quantity in market A. Okay. Okay, so market A is domestic, right? So once again, the key here is that supply also equals marginal cost, okay? So when wages go up, it's like almost exactly like a tariff. It means the cost of producing goes up per unit, right? Because they're having to pay the workers more to produce whatever it is. So that's going to cause a shift. So say we're back here again. Well, that's going to cause a shift in the supply like this, okay? Because the wages are going up makes it more expensive. The marginal cost of supply goes up. So that's going to mean a reduced supply. So the supply curve in market A shifts to the left or inward. You can say leftward or inward. Either one is correct. And what that's going to mean is the new equilibrium is going to be a higher price right here and a lower quantity produced. Okay, so we go the other way. All right. So we end up back here because we have a so wages. Come on, trying to grab this guy. I can't make him move. Come on. All right, here we go. Okay. So wage rates, labor workers are part of what's called a factor input of production. And when any factor input goes up, that's going to increase marginal cost, which means supply is decreased because it's more expensive. So you end up going from here to here. Okay, so the answer would be the supply curve shifts leftward, price increases, quantity produced and demanded decreases. Or you can just say equilibrium quantity. This is the equilibrium quantity, goes from here to here. So our new market equilibrium is a decreased quantity. Okay? All right, now part D. I think we did part A, right? We did all of part A, part C. I mean, yeah. Say D. Using the graph, show and explain how the increase in the wage rate of textile workers and the change in the price and quantity you identified in part C will affect a firm's demand for labor and a firm's supply for labor. Okay. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, so this might be the last thing that we do, okay? And I might just pick this up on Saturday or do another one because this is a lot. But this is what that would look like. Sorry. Okay. This is the labor supply and demand for an individual firm where we have wage rate, not price now, it's wage rate, and quantity of labor hired. So as the wage goes up, quantity of labor demanded goes down. Now the big difference here is, hey Julia, by the way, hi Julia, nice to see you come in. How are you? This is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the whole thing, the part that you missed, okay? Later on, so don't worry. Firms demand labor. Consumers up here are the ones who are demanding clothes, textiles. But in the labor market, firms are the demanders. They're the ones demanding labor. So the actual wage is the supply curve in labor. I know that sounds kind of I know that sounds weird, but take my word for it. And because it's perfectly competitive, one of the things about that is wages are set by the market. So the firm has to take whatever wage is set in the market, so they can't change it. So the wage is what the wage is. Firms just have to pay. Think of it like this. Say there's a town has 100 McDonald's, right? And the starting pay at McDonald's and Burger King and Hardee's is $10 an hour. Well, no firm can only pay $8 an hour because no one's going to work there, because they just go work where they're going to get $10 an hour. So the market sets a wage, and the firms pretty much have to pay it, or they can't get any workers because they'll just go work somewhere else, okay? So this is the wage right here. And then the demand for labor is the downward sloping curve right here. And you're not going to completely understand this, and we're going to spend a lot of time this year working with this, but just know that demand for labor is what we call the marginal revenue product of labor, which is the marginal product times the price, okay? And that's just sort of something, that's just what it is. You can jot that down. You're not going to fully understand it, but it's just something that you just know now, and we'll talk a lot more about it later, just to sort of get in your head thinking, okay? Well, but anyway, the problem, or the question is, show and explain how an increase in the wage rate. Okay, so all that we have to do then is show an increase in the wage rate, which is right here. Okay. Just show it going up. So you draw that, right? Now, the other thing you have to think about is that the price that we figured out over here went up, right? The price went up. So since the price of the textiles went up, it means that the firms are going to demand more labor because they can sell, because they want to make more, because as the price goes up, they're going to want to supply more. Now, I know that's confusing, so don't get too worried about it, because there's a lot of things happening here. But it's just sort of theoretical, and part of what they want you to understand is that whenever a price of a good goes up, a firm is going to want to make more of it because they can make more profit. So they're going to demand more labor. So you might see a little bit of a shift out in the demand curve. But the important thing here is that you just show that an increase in wage is going to move from here to here, which means that they'll probably end up producing less. So quantity produced will probably be less. So even if this shifts a little bit, right, and you end up here, and you end up here, most likely you're going to be, so just for this answer, and just all I want you to do is sort of get introduced to what a labor supply and demand for a firm curve looks like, and just know that when the wage goes up, the most likely thing that's going to happen is that the quantity, the quantity supplied is going to go down. So you're going to end up somewhere around here, okay, at a higher wage, and not produced, sorry, a higher wage and less quantity hired, because this is how many workers are hired. And that just makes sense, right? If wages go up, firms are going to hire less workers, right? That's just what, theoretically what's going to happen. And there's many, many other variables. So I'll stop there with the problems, and I'll pick up problem 2 and 3 on Saturday. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so we don't record, we don't have to.